Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our planning meeting. It's Monday, October the 27th, 2025. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Meeting will be streamed live and recorded for public viewing on the town's YouTube page. We acknowledge that this land on which we are gathered today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, the Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as Anishinaabe. It is through the connection of the Anishinaabe with the spirit of the land, the water, and air that we recognize their unique cultures, traditions, and values. Together, as treaty people, we have a shared responsibility to act with respect for the environment that sustains all of life, protecting the future for those generations to come. Council, I would remind you, if you have a pecuniary interest, to please declare it at the appropriate time. Instead of going to item number 4, which is a delegation, I'm going to use my mayor powers and move us to item 6.1, Council. I have a motion by Councillor Van Claveren, seconded by Councillor Wolbeck. That the report by Maria Casarasi, Senior Planner, dated October the 7th, 2025, regarding the removal of the holding symbol from the residential 3(8) with holding symbol bracket R3 bracket 8 H to R3 bracket 8 for the lands legally described as concession 3, east part of lot 14, RP 25R-11407 part 2 be received. Further, that bylaw 107 of 2025, being a bylaw which removes the H holding symbol, be approved and taken as having been read 3 times, finally passed, and the mayor and the clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaw accordingly. Any questions? Call for the vote. All those in favor? That's carried.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest. Yeah.
Okay, Council, let's go back to item number 4. This evening we have a delegation. I'd like to welcome Lisa Courtney, who's with BM Ross and Associates, and is going to give us an education session on our upcoming development charges and some changes that are taking place. Lisa, welcome. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here. For some of you, this may be a bit of old news. You may have previous experience with development charges. For some, it may be a totally new idea, but for everybody, I will go through some of the changes that have been put in place since development charges were last discussed here in Plympton-Wyoming in 2020. It's lovely to see everybody in person because the last time we did this, we were all in a Brady Bunch arrangement on screen. So it's really nice to be here in person. So development charges are a tool that allow municipalities to recover capital costs associated with services or projects put in place that benefit growth. And you can see I've got growth highlighted there on the screen. And that's really the important part of development charges, is that they are collected from growth and they are for growth. So they might be new infrastructure projects that are supporting growth, or they might be existing projects that benefit growth and you're paying back some component or some portion of the project. The general idea of development charges is that growth pays for growth, so that your existing tax base isn't paying for those services put in place that benefit growth. We can't collect development charges for operating or maintenance costs. So if you need a new snowplow, we might be able to get some development charges for that new snowplow, but we can't pay for the person to operate that snowplow through development charges. We only collect development charges from new growth. We don't collect them from any existing or residents or businesses. And they're not a new concept. They have been in place in Ontario since 1989. So development charges are not a number that's picked out of the sky. We have to base it on a capital works plan that's set out in the background study, and that study identifies what projects are being paid for through development charges and what proportion of the project costs are being paid for through development charges. There's lots of rules around development charges, specifically around how we calculate them and what we can collect for. It all comes from the Development Charge Act. And when it comes down to it, it's a really fun mix of accounting, planning, and engineering that makes you the most popular person at any dinner party. Talk about development charges. But any money you do collect through development charges does have to go towards development charge projects. It's my job as the consultant to provide advice and calculate essentially what the ceiling is for your development charges in terms of what's fair and reasonable as per the rules of the Act. But ultimately, council makes the decision on where the charges end up. I will essentially give you that ceiling, as I said. You can charge there or below. You couldn't charge above it. So when we talk about growth and projects, generally developers are responsible for all the works within their property. So if they have to build roads, sewers, water, stormwater within their property, that's on them, that's on their dime. But if we have to expand the sewer to their property, or expand the road even, that's something the municipality has to pick up. And there are three ways or three sources of income for a municipality essentially. That's your user fees, taxes and reserves, development charges, and if you're lucky, grants. Often we have to build those things that we need for growth before the growth occurs. There's kind of an engineering reality to that. You can't buy half a snowplow. You can't, build half of a water storage tank. You have to build those things whole. Sometimes it comes down to costing and efficiencies. If you're going to tear up a road, it makes sense when you've got that road tear up or up to do that, expansion to the water main that's in it, rather than doing the road and then coming back in 5 years and tearing it all up again and putting in that expanded water main. As well as there's sometimes legislative requirements. You can't provide capacity through your water and wastewater systems that you're not rated to supply. So those documents have a limit on what you can supply, and if you're not allowed under the appropriate legislation to supply more than what that limit is. So ultimately, it falls on municipalities to pay those capital costs up front. So development charges were developed as a way to get one-time fees that you can levy on development to pay for that expanded infrastructure or projects that's put in place for growth. So you incur the cost to service that growth, but it may take decades for that growth to actually develop, that you would collect taxes. So development charges were implemented as a way to get that money back a little more quickly. If you shift all the costs onto your tax or user base, you might run into the burden of shifting all those costs there and having significant increases in your taxes or user rates. So, and then also as well, people may ask, well, I've already paid for my infrastructure. Why am I paying for that infrastructure that doesn't service or benefit me? So ultimately, development charges were developed to come up with a way to collect that money a little closer than through taxes. There are some arguments against development charges. You'll hear these primarily from developers, and that comes down to house prices. And this has been a hot topic definitely in the last 5 years. And that's, development charges impact housing prices. And yep, they do. The costs get passed from the developer onto the person buying the house. There's no denying that. But there's lots of other factors that impact housing costs. And the big ones are land prices and housing production costs. So housing prices have risen across Ontario, and that's regardless of whether municipalities have development charges or not. And they really haven't risen at the same level that housing prices have risen at. So there's not a true one-to-one correlation between development charges and house prices. They certainly influence it, but it's not a one-to-one ratio by any means. We also have to consider, in areas where they don't have development charges, the cost for new servicing is paid through the tax base, whether through property taxes or user fees, and then you get a significant increase in your taxes, and that can reduce your overall housing affordability over the long run as well. They also argue that, or sometimes perceive that, development charges make municipalities less competitive to another municipality. There's little evidence that I've seen that supports that. Places like Toronto would have stopped developing years ago if that was the case, because they have development charges that are, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But full steam ahead in places like Mississauga, where there are some of the highest development charges in Ontario. Generally, developers will build in communities where they think they can sell houses. And that is usually a function of amenities and services, as well as a number of other things. If you don't build it, they won't come. So I'm just going to run through a quick little example of development charge funding. So we're going to talk about the municipality of Exampleville, who's had development charges in place from 2019 to 2024. If they average 25 new single detached units per year, they've got development charges of about $8,000 for each single detached unit. So you can see in the chart on the right-hand side, shows you the revenue from those 25 units. And you get about $1 million annually from those development charges that gets put into the reserves that then gets put towards, in Exampleville's case, transportation, administration, stormwater, fire protection, and parks and recreation projects. We dive a little deeper into Exampleville's development charges. They've got a new pumper tanker truck that they're going to purchase in 2025 for $800,000 and replace one, but it's a larger unit. So we've determined that 60% of the cost is attributable to the existing and 40% is attributed to future. So in 2025, because we've been collecting development charges, we've got a fire reserve DC account, and it's got about $187,000 in it. So the township pays the $800,000 for the truck upfront in 2025. They write that check. $480,000 is paid through reserves and taxes to cover the portion that's attributed to the existing population. $320,000, that's the portion that's attributed to the future, is split between the $187,000 that they've got in their reserve fund piggy bank for that project. And then $132,000 would be paid for general reserves. And then they would continue to collect development charges and pay back that $132,000 as they collect money as each new house comes along, to cover that cost that was not in the development charge reserve at the time of buying that fire truck. So for most development charge projects, quite often there's a portion that benefits the existing population, as well as some that benefits future. We have to net out what the benefit to the existing is. So quite often for development charges, we're collecting a piece of the pie. We might not get the entire project, but we'll get a piece of it. For all development charge projects, usually the municipality has to front end the costs. So when we think about our fire truck, $800,000, and then you collect as growth occurs and put that money against the amount that was front end. The rate of repayment may vary depending on how fast growth occurs, as well as how much was attributed initially to future. So in practice, development charges are calculated for both residential and non-residential growth. We separate those out to make sure residential is paying for non-residential share and vice versa. We collect development charges from residential based on the type of unit. So a development charge for a single detached unit is so much. A development charge for an apartment is so much. For non-residential development charges, they're typically charged out on either a per square foot or a per square meter basis. Where we have specific projects that benefit specific areas, we can only collect development charges from those areas that benefit from that specific project. So often in municipalities, we might see a different charge in a rural area versus an urban area. And this is primarily because those urban areas have municipal water and wastewater services. If there's a development charge project that is we'll say a wastewater project, you would only collect that development charge from the areas that get that service. So if the wastewater doesn't go out to the rural areas, you don't get to collect that wastewater development charge from the rural area. So the Development Charge Act is our rule book that we have to follow. It sets out the rules and requirements for enacting a development charge bylaw, as well as how the municipality collects and reports its development charges. So it sets out what types of projects we can collect for, how we calculate development charges. It sets out the requirement that the municipality has to complete a background study prior to passing a bylaw. It used to be you had to do this every 5 years. And it was changed now that you don't have to do it until every 10 years. This is relatively new, and we haven't even got to the 10-year mark since this changed. So we'll see how long a lot of municipalities wait, if they wait that 10 years or if they kind of stick to the 5. There's no reason, there's no rule that says you can't do it at 5 or 6 or 7. But now you can let it live until 10. It also sets out the reporting requirements for your treasurer, who has to do an annual report on the development charge reserve accounts. As I said, they were originally put in place in 1989, and it's been amended many, many times since then. This is probably the act that I print the most to go through it. So amendments include, types of projects that can be collected for, how development charges are collected, phasing requirements. They just proposed some more changes last Thursday that I still got to sort through. So probably as we go through this process, there will be another amendment to the Development Charge Act, but I'll let you know when we know what actually falls on the ground there. So this slide just summarizes some of the changes that have occurred, and this is just since 2022. So one of the very first things that was done when the provincial government, the current provincial government got into power was they removed housing as an eligible category for the collection of development charges. I don't know why, but they did. So municipalities can no longer collect for housing services. They added an exemption for third residential units in new and existing homes. They added exemptions for affordable and attainable housing, nonprofit housing, as well as units that are put in through an exclusionary zoning bylaw. They put in mandatory phasing of development charges, and this, you might remember from the news, it kind of got a little bit more attention than some of the other changes, because it said that you could only collect 80% of your calculated development charges the first year, 85 the second year, 90 the third year, 95, and then year 5 you could finally collect 100% of your calculated development charges, which left a lot of municipalities saying, hey, that leaves us with a big hole. And so the government actually then walked that back and repealed the phasing in of development charges. They had taken out the ability to collect for studies, and then put that back in. So we can collect for studies once again, which is great. They had an exemption for long-term care development. They recently changed the expiry date, or I should say rather, they changed it so that if you want to change the expiry date of your bylaw, or you're repealing indexing of your bylaw, decreasing the development charges, it made it easier to amend a development charge bylaw. Previously, you had to open the whole thing up, go through this whole background study process and a public meeting. It was pretty onerous just to make a little change. So that is one really nice change. They put in a deferral of payments of development charges from building permits to occupancy permits. So that's a new change that is not yet enforced. We're hoping to get some more details about that because they do also have to change some building code things with that. They removed the ability to charge interest on DCs that are paid in installments. Again, not yet enforced. This is a relatively new amendment, but something we're keeping an eye on, and we'll let you know when the rules actually change. For developments that require a site plan or zoning bylaw amendment, the DC will be based on the lower of the date they meet that application or the date they get their building permit. There's also potentially future regulations coming in place about credits issued under development charges. So if a developer did some work, say they expanded a water main on your behalf, they would get credit towards their water development charge for that work. So there's going to be some changes as to whether that credit could be applied across a different category other than water. Right now, if they did a water project that benefited you, they would get credit for that. But it only goes against their water DC. There was one in place. They couldn't apply it to their road fee. So we'll keep an eye on what that change may look like, because we haven't seen the regulations yet. And as well as they're working to better define what local services are in relation to development charges and what can be charged for as a local service and what cannot. So there are a number of exemptions and discounts or reductions to development charges that come straight out of the act. So these, everybody gets no matter where they are. So they include a second and third additional dwelling unit in existing and new homes and accessory units. So let's say I have a single detached house and I put an apartment in my basement. I don't pay development charges on that apartment in my basement. And then let's say I have a garage and I put a second story on it and I put a unit in that garage. I wouldn't pay developments on that third unit either. If you expand an existing industrial building less than 50%, you don't pay development charges. As I said before, affordable rental residential units and affordable owned units are exempt from development charges, and that's based on criteria set out by the Affordable Residential Units Bulletin. So in Plympton-Wyoming, your current affordable housing price for a single detached home is $462,000. So if a developer built a single detached home that was valued less than that, they would be exempt from development charges. If they were building a rental unit, their affordable rent would have to be less than $1,400 for a 2-bedroom to be considered an affordable rental unit and be exempt from development charges. Nonprofit housing and long-term care home developments are exempt from development charges. As I said before, exclusionary zoning bylaw units are exempt from development charges. And then if a developer builds a purpose-built rental housing development, so it has more than 4 units all intended to be used for rental purposes, they get a discount based on the number of bedrooms in each unit. So for each 3-bedroom or more unit, they would get 25% discount. If they have 2-bedroom units, they get a 20% discount. And then for bachelors and 1-bedroom units, they would get 15% discount for each of those units. Council also has the ability to add in their own exemptions or discounts, depending on what they decide is important in their municipality. Common ones typically include agricultural buildings, so barns, sheds, that type of structure. Churches, cemeteries, and temporary structures. Some municipalities totally exempt all non-residential development. They kind of see that as an incentive. Some charge everybody everything. For any exemptions or discounts provided by council, it is important to remember that that exemption or discount we cannot collect from future development charges. So once, you've said, nope, we don't want to collect from you, we can't go to the next person and say, we're going to collect double from you because we didn't charge that first fella. So it's just important to remember that what you don't collect through development charges then has to come from your existing tax base. So there is a process that has to be followed before you can implement a development charge bylaw. The first step is undertaking a background study. So we look at growth and projects that might be included in the development charge, and work on calculating what each development charge for each project will be to get a number. That number then gets presented to council and staff. And typically at that point, we kind of ask council to give us an idea if they're thinking, yeah, that's kind of about the number we want to charge development charges at. And then we have a public meeting. That public meeting gives developers or anybody else the opportunity to provide feedback on the projects or the number for development charges. Once that public meeting has been held, council can then pass the bylaw afterwards, and you do have to issue a notice of passage. There's a 40-day appeal period that starts the day after the bylaw is passed. So this slide summarizes the types of projects that are eligible for collection under the development charge project. So the first 4 are what I call your hard services: water, wastewater, storm, and roads. And then we get into some of the other services that different municipalities provide. You may not provide some of these, and electrical power services, I don't think are something that Plympton-Wyoming really provides. So we wouldn't be collecting for those because that's not a service you provide. Waste diversion services. The diversion part of that is really important. The law actually specifically says you cannot collect for landfills. I've never really understood why that isn't a component of growth, but That's what the rules say. You can collect for policing services, fire protection, ambulance services, library services. If you provide long-term care, a lot of upper tier municipalities collect for the long-term care because they do provide that service. Parks and recreation, child care and early years program, bylaw enforcement, and if you had a municipally administered court, collect for that, as well as emergency preparedness service. If your project does not fit into the categories on this slide, you cannot collect for it through development charges. As I said, for development charges, we can't collect for operating and maintenance costs. If we were doing something like just resurfacing an asphalt road, it's got a bunch of potholes, need a new coat, we couldn't collect for that through development charges. If we're replacing a fire truck with exactly the same fire truck, so it's basically a 1-for-1 or a like-for-like replacement, that wouldn't be eligible for development charges. If we take pumps and a sewage treatment plant, and we replace them with the pumps with the exact same capacity, we wouldn't be able to collect for that through development charges. But when we get into adding capacity, so we add pumps that are a bigger size, we could collect for those oversized pumps. If we get to the point where we need to add vehicles to the fleet, so we're adding a pickup truck, or we're adding another snowplow, or we're adding another fire truck, we could collect development charges for that addition. We have to take a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. We could collect for a portion of that project. We need to upsize sewers or water main. Again, those are things we can collect for through development charges. When do development charges typically apply? Let's say I buy a lot here in Plympton-Wyoming and I build a new house. I pay development charges. I take my lot and I build an office building on it, I would pay development charges. If I had to buy a commercial building, let's say I buy an old industrial factory and I turned it into trendy loft apartments, I would pay development charges on that change of use. If I have a house and I put an addition on it, I wouldn't pay development charges. If I have a cottage, I live there, use it as a cottage, but then I decide I'm going to retire here and I turn it into a permanent home, I wouldn't pay development charges on that. And typically we do include in our development charge bylaws, something happens, my house burns down, I have to build a new one, I wouldn't pay development charges on that new house, provided I get it done within a set amount of time, and usually that's 5 years. So how do we calculate development charges? Well, we start by forecasting future growth and development. So we'll look at past trends, we'll look at what other forecasts have been done, and we'll kind of come up with an idea of what we think growth and development might look like. We then have to look at your average 15-year level of service, because we cannot charge in excess of that average 15 level of service. I like to think of it as, your existing level of service is a Chev. We can't charge developers for the Cadillac model. We then look at what projects are on the books for servicing future growth and development, and we look at the net capital costs for those projects. We do have to subtract out any grants or subsidies that you might get. So let's say you have a big water tower project and you get a grant, which is great. We do have to net that grant out of the development charge calculation. We also have to subtract out any portion of the development charge that's attributable to the existing population. So we'll stick with my water tower example. Let's say you don't have a water tower and you build a new one. It's going to service the folks that are already in the community as well as some new ones. So we have to net out that portion of the water tower project that benefits the existing folks. Generally, we collect development charges when a building permit is issued. There's a few exceptions, and there's a few caveats to when we calculate what the development charge for a specific development may be. And those are when we have a site plan or a zoning bylaw amendment that's required. So those developments are subject to what's called the development charge freeze. And they get to pay the development charge that's the lower of the charge the day they submitted their site plan or zoning bylaw application, or when they get their building permit. 18 months between those dates. If they don't get anything done, they don't have to charge, or they don't get that option of choosing which lower one they want. They have to pay the charge the date of the building permit. If there's no site plan or zoning bylaw required, they have to pay the development charge based on the date of, or the charge the date of the issuance of the permit or the occupancy permit. When you collect development charges, you are obligated to establish a separate reserve that money you collect goes into. And you have to have a separate reserve fund for each development charge service category. So a service category might be water, wastewater, roads, that kind of thing. The money you collect gets then put into those reserves. And you can only use those reserves for those development charge projects that you've identified. If you got in a pinch, you could borrow from those reserves for another project, but you have to pay that money back with interest. So your development charge bylaw used to be a 5-year, had a 5-year lifespan. Now it lasts up to 10. But as I said earlier, there's no reason you couldn't open it up at 6 years, 8 years, whatever works for the municipality. And in your bylaw, you can include your own specific exemptions. So as I said, quite often agricultural buildings, non-residential development. You can include your own discounts if you wanted to encourage a certain type of development. In one municipality I worked in, they really wanted retirement home type development. So really geared to seniors, but not a nursing home. So they discounted that type of development chart. You can also include phasing schedules. If there's a significant change in your development charge, some municipalities will opt to phase in that change in the charge. And these are all decisions that council makes. I might provide recommendations or give you some ideas of what other places have done, but ultimately it's a decision of council. So when it comes to changing a development charge bylaw, there's some things that might encourage you to make a change earlier. So as I said, these bylaws now can last 10 years. We'll see if many of them actually live that long, because 10 years, a lot can happen in 10 years. So if you had a new development charge project that was fairly major, so like some of the most major ones we deal with are the ones that relate to expansions of water and wastewater systems. So you have to build a new wastewater treatment plant. That's a big project that has big dollars usually attached to it. So that's something that municipalities would typically open up their development charge bylaw and make sure that project gets in. If you had a significant change in the cost of a project, going from what was expected or kind of anticipated to what the actual cost was. If you had to remove projects, and it's actually a lot easier to remove a project now, because it makes your development charge go down, so we don't have to do a whole amendment and bylaw and meeting process with that. Or if you got a significant grant. So let's say you do have to do your major water treatment plant upgrade, but you get a grant. Super. You want to make sure you get that grant in there and bring that development charge down so that it's fair for everybody who's paying that development charge. How does a bylaw get changed? If you have to add in a project, the amendment process is similar to passing a new bylaw. So you have to do a background study, public meeting, and then pass the bylaw. You can do it for just a single specific project without opening the rest of the bylaw up. But you would then have 2 development charge bylaws that you'd have to keep track of. You can pass an area specific bylaw. So again, this is something you'd have to have the background study, have the public meeting, go through that whole process. When it was a 5-year expiry date, sometimes you just waited it out. If you were in year 4, well, it probably just made sense to wait it out. And then now for any reductions in development charges, we can just amend the existing bylaw without having to go through and open up the background study or have a public meeting. But it is important to note that you can have more than one development charge in place, and a lot of the bigger centers, so think of your Mississaugas, that type of thing, they'll have almost as many development charges bylaws as you can count. So currently in Plympton-Wyoming, you do have development charges and you collect them for parks and recreation, fire services, public works, fleet and facilities, as well as studies that fall under administration category. You don't have an area specific charge. It's one charge across the entire municipality. So no matter whether I'm right here in Wyoming or if I'm out in the country, if I build a new house, a new single detached unit, I'm paying a little over $10,000 in development charges. If I was to build a multi-residential unit here in Wyoming, I'd pay a little over $7,500. If I build an apartment, a little over $6,500. And then if I was to build a non-residential building, I'd pay $1.67 for each square meter. So this slide just summarizes the current projects that are specifically included in the 2021 development charges. So under fire services, it included a pumper truck and firefighter outfitting. So as your population grows, your firefighters need the equipment to actually go fight a fire, so you can collect for that bunker gear. Under the Parks and Recreation splash pad, we've got the Parks and Recreation master plan, and then some park improvements and washroom improvements. Under Public Works, facility improvements were included. We've got a new single axle plow / dump truck, some upgrades to maintenance equipment, as well as a study on a waste transfer facility. Under administration, we can collect for the development charge study through development charge. You know, it benefits growth, so it makes sense that we can collect for that, as well as your official plan review, your strategic plan and zoning bylaw update. And then under roads, there's quite a number of road upgrades that were identified the last go round, as well as some sidewalks, road need studies, and a transportation master plan. Quite often when I do these presentations or I talk about development charges to municipalities, one of the things I get asked is, well, what are the neighbors doing? I'm quite happy to tell you, no problem there. But what I want you to remember is that development charges are based on growth-related projects. So it's the projects that municipality is undertaking to service the growth that they have. So it's really not an apples to apples comparison. And you'll see, even in the next slide where I show you the numbers, there's quite a variation in development charges. And that's all just based on what municipalities are doing. So where municipalities are doing major infrastructure upgrades to water and wastewater, that's where you'll see higher development charges. So this slide just summarizes what a development charge for a single detached unit is in a number of local-ish municipalities. And they range kind of anywhere from a little under 5,000 all the way up to about 45,000. And that's, again, just a function of what they have to do to service growth in those different places. But what you can see is that a lot of municipalities have different charges for their different areas. So I'll just kind of pick on Lucan Biddulph as an example. So they're kind of second or third from the left there. So we have Lucan Biddulph Lucan, which has a development charge of just a little under 30 or 40,000 per single detached unit now. And that's a function of they have to do a major expansion to their wastewater treatment plant. Major expansion. So that's what that development charge really is all about. Whereas if you go to the rural Lucan Biddulph charge, it's under 5,000. And then you also have Granton, which doesn't have, or it has a wastewater charge and a water charge, like another little urban area would, but they're not doing any projects there. So the charge for Granton is much lower, and it's just a little over 5,000. Your neighbors in Sarnia, they're the highest development charge on the table here, and that's for development area 2. And that again just reflects they're taking essentially farmers' fields to urban areas. So roads, stormwater, water, wastewater, all that will be included in that development charge. And then the little kind of orangey red column is where you folks are. So that's Plympton-Wyoming's in comparison to some of the neighboring municipalities. But you can see quite a variation in range in development charges, even locally. So that's development charges in a nutshell. Be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney, for that presentation. We can open up, as she said, for questions. I'll open the floor to council first and then to staff if they have any questions as well. So, council, any questions from you? Councilor Bojan?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first one, thank you for the presentation. For things on our current development charge project list that didn't get completed, or there's money sitting there for those things, if they don't get realized and we switch to this new one, does that money stay in there for those specific projects, or does that get carried over to the new fund for the new projects?
Great question through you, Mr. Mayor. So if a project, we'll just pick a road, say a road project doesn't get done, but there's been money collected for that road project by however many years. The money stays in the reserve account for roads, but gets applied to another development charge road project. So if a project doesn't get done, you want to keep it in that same reserve account and credit it towards a similar road project so that the money collected for growth is still going towards a growth related project of the same category.
My second question is, I think you kind of answered this question with that last chart in terms of the residential varying DCs. So can you do area specific for when you're waiving or reducing commercial or non-residential DCs, can you make that area specific similar to how you do it with a community improvement plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly you can. That's a decision council can make. I've seen some municipalities do it for downtown core areas that they're looking to revitalize. They might, reduce development charges, from this street to this street in the downtown core, or, commercial development or whatever is decided. But yep, that's a decision council can make.
Thank you.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you. So here we do frontage fees for wastewater and water. Sorry. So with the provincial government changes where they're trying to streamline everything or whatever. Because we don't do those things under C charges and we do them separately. Are they planning on, that you can't do it separately and now you have to do it in DC charges?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't heard of any specific changes requiring you to not collect that way.
Okay.
But if you collected that way, you wouldn't collect through development charges just because you can't double charge. You can't collect the same charge twice.
Okay. So because we may very well be allowed to stay as frontage fees, then they wouldn't fall under any of this new legislation on DC charges.
Unless there was a specific project that was identified that we would say, this isn't being paid for through frontage fees, we're going to collect it through development charges. We could do that, but if it's going to be collected through the frontage, we couldn't collect it through DCs.
Sabansky.
Yes, and Councilor Rodriguez, last number of development charge studies, we did look at incorporating water. Council at the time decided not to and to stay with the DCs. I think we are planning to do the same thing today to show council if you were to collect for water, wastewater through development charges, what that would look like, what that would do for your overall comparison to other municipalities, and how that would compare to what we currently bring in frontage fees versus what we would currently could bring in for development charges. So we will definitely incorporate that discussion into the development charge discussion when we bring it back to council.
Yes, I think that's, if I may, sorry. I think that's good to have that knowledge in case the government tries to, at least we know, but it is good that it won't be met with the same restrictions we're now finding on DC charges where it does stay separate. And it'd be good to look at what we're charging because there's, like, we have double the amount in one area for those frontage fees versus another, so.
Yeah, and those are definitely pros and cons that we'll bring up. The current frontage fees are per section of water main essentially. So they vary wildly between even municipal blocks. And were set probably 30 years ago. Some charged interest, some didn't. So they're extremely inconsistent, hard to track of, and can't change them. So there is benefits both ways. The exit legislation that those frontage fees were created was just the Local Improvement Act, which the government hasn't really chose to do anything with it lately. It's not to say that they won't in the future. So where they have taken a keen interest in development charges over the last 5 years. So, but we'll look at those pros and cons. I believe we looked at them the last term as well. So we'll review what we discussed last time updated accordingly with the new numbers and bring it back for discussion at council.
Anything, council, deputy mayor?
Yeah, this to Adam. So are they going to figure out both ways? Whether we put water and sewer under DC charges or separately? Are we gonna see those figures for both?
You would see your figures if water and wastewater were to be incorporated into your development charges.
Okay.
And then you would have your revenue information from the last 5 to 10 years for connection and frontage fees.
Just one more thing. So if we have a big project on the go and it doesn't get done for maybe 10 years, that project is going to escalate in price. Is there any little information you could put in that DC bylaw that would cover that?
So typically we try, if it's a project that we know is further along that, 10-year time frame, we might say, in today's dollars, it's 1 million. In 2021 dollars or $2032, it might be X. That's something we can.
Anything else, deputy? That's it, thanks. Councilor Van Claveren,
Nothing from me, sir. Very good presentation. Thank you.
Willett, anything?
Thing I have is on fire services. It's pretty clear to me that fire services aren't keeping up the cost of equipment. And I realize you can't claim for fire trucks, which is probably a huge, one of the biggest items that we have. But and I think it's kind of going along with what Nettie asked on, everything's increasing in cost substantially. Personally, I don't believe we have enough in the DC charges for fire versus some of the other things that are in that list. So how do we increase? Is that a council decision to increase the amount that we would contribute to, say, fire or parks or any of the other that our decision?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we have to base development charges on the projects that are included in the background study. So if, as part of, when we look at development charges again, one of the things we look at is, if we said, bumper seats cost $10,000 in 2020 and now they cost 15, we increase that cost. And then for things like fire trucks in small municipalities, you run into this quite often because you're not very often buying that second or third truck. You're quite often limited to replacing. Now with fire services, you do have kind of minimum standards isn't the right word, but they have to meet a standard. And so if your old truck doesn't meet that standard and your new truck will meet that standard, we will be able to collect a portion because you have to meet that standard. So, we will get a piece of the pie, but it might not be, of a $800,000 truck, it might be 10-15% rather than, a 50-50 split.
Yeah, that's all I have for now. Just curious about the fire service. So we can increase it, or you do it automatically, like you're watching that.
Yeah, we look at, what kind of the going rate is, so to speak, for equipment and projects that would be included. And, part of our development charge process is we sit down with staff and we brainstorm, what projects might come in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And, what gets included in this development charge, what might go to the next one, and, what costs are appropriate to include.
Recently, we upgraded to a ladder truck, which we never had before. So would that be eligible for a development charge?
I'd have to, get into the details, but,
It's an upgrade. We never had that, right?
potentially a portion, but we'll get into it and look, and
Thank you.
either you'll see it on the list or you won't.
Okay.
Councilor? Councilor Vacy?
Thank you. Just follow up on Bob. 5 years from now, we decide we need to increase our firemen by 10 guys, 5 at each hall. Can we do their bunker gear? We can. But now we have education, which is a huge cost to us right now. Like that kind of thing, can that be incorporated in as an expansion of our forces?
So definitely gear and equipment, because that's a capital costs.
Yeah.
But when we get into operational type costs, so that would be training, we would be able to collect for that through development charges.
That sucks.
Yeah, sorry. Sometimes with development charges, I feel like I'm the bearer of bad news.
So I think it,
Okay. Staff, any questions from you? Okay. Well, thank you again for that presentation. It's very educational. I think we've all learned something and probably learning something, the better term. So thank you very much for what you've done and putting this together for us.
Thank you. And if you go home and, the question comes to you at, as soon as your head hits the pillow, like it quite often does with me, feel free to reach out to staff and, they can get a hold of me and we can get your questions answered.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Please go.
Absolutely.
So, are we doing this soon?
Oh, yes.
So the current development charges study actually expires just after council potentially could go lame duck. So we are planning to bring it in the spring of 2026 to ensure that the bylaw is in place prior to expiry. Yes, we're currently undertaking the study with Lisa and hope to bring this back to council in spring at best.
Great. Thank you.
Take care.
See you in the spring.
Okay, council, let's go to item number 5.1. I have a motion by Councillor Basie, seconded by Councillor Bojan, that the report by Maria Casarasi, Senior Planner, dated October the 8th, 2025, regarding a housing amendment to the town zoning bylaw 97, 2003, related to additional residential units, ARUs, be received. And that zoning bylaw 98, 2025, be approved by council and be taken as having read 3 times and finally passed, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaw accordingly. Ms. Casarasi is here in case we have any questions. Ms. Casarasi, anything to add to your report?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Questions? Okay, call for the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. We've already done 6.1, 7.1, clerk, anything that's been added since then.
Nothing added to it.
8.1, I have a motion by Councillor Bojan, seconded by Councillor Vacy. Council receives the draft county official plan review documents and draft population projections, including on their website, and that council requests an extension of the public feedback period to ensure adequate engagement is carried out, and that a request be made to have a County of Lambton senior planning official attend a planning council meeting to provide a presentation and to answer questions of council. Questions on this motion? Councillor Rodriguez?
Thank you. So how does it work? Like, it comes to us for a comment. And then does each municipality have a public meeting? on it?
Ransky, you want this one?
Don't believe so, but your development manager has confirmed that no, there's no public meeting at the municipal level.
Did they do that in your ear? And the other concern I had, so it's good that we do have a delegate. It's like, I think some of our commercial that on the maps. They're missing some maps of some other areas too. So I find that interesting.
Well, that's why it's better before we do this, before we proceed any further.
Yeah, great.
Anything further? Councillor Bojan, sorry, didn't see there.
So this motion is basically just asking the county to give us more time. But we don't know if they're gonna give more time, so is this gonna come back in November, and then that's our last chance before December 12th? I'm just, because if they say, yeah, nah, we're just gonna keep going, December 12th, the deadline. I mean, like, I've got questions, but I can hold on
Zoom
to them.
confirmation of that fairly early. If we do not, staff will prepare a report, providing our opinion of what is being presented and council's options to consider. We are hoping that you get more time so we can receive the presentation, then bring a report to council, and then council provide their wholesome comments. But we're likely to receive an extension to the best of my knowledge.
Will was blocking her.
Anything further? Call for the vote. All those in favor? It's carried. Okay, item 9. Motion by Councillor Wolvette, seconded by Councillor Van Claveren, that the correspondence items A to C. A to C related to recommended reading and routine approval and information items not otherwise addressed by resolution. Noted is received by the Plympton-Wyoming Council and filed accordingly. The Committee of Adjustment notices and decisions, as well as the site plan agreement from George and Stedman Properties. And Council, you will recall we had a good presentation from the George and Stedman Properties, which will certainly be a boost to our community. Anything further on that one? All those in favor? Was carried. New business related to planning. Councilor Wolvette, anything from you?
No, sir.
Councilor Van Claveren?
Nothing from me, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor? Rodriguez?
So when you're doing development agreements or site plan agreements or condo agreements, whatever you call them, do you like have some sort of policy that you follow for what's required standard items? So for example, sidewalks is where I'm gonna zoom in on. So sidewalks are really have been a changing dynamic for some years now. But more multi-use, and we go back to with gold leaf, and I see it more in other jurisdictions. Instead of a traditional sidewalk, which requires a lot of material and infrastructure, and are more meant for pedestrians, multi-use paths are more accessible in many ways. So I go back to, is that something written in stone somewhere, or is that something that you can be more flexible on?
It's not written in stone. We do not have a formal council endorsed policy. The development agreements is a loaded word because development agreements for subdivisions and condos are very different than what they are for site plans. But generally speaking, we get comments from Lambton Public Health. Lambton Public Health will recommend sidewalks or trails in certain areas. And then operations will review that request and determine where that's feasible given the road layout. And that's what you're presented in typically development plans. The general standard is that we do try to supply pedestrian accessibility to all new development when it's feasible to do so, but there's no in-stone standard. Just general guidelines based off comments, and in the end, it's council's decision as a whole.
So I wasn't trying to suggest that they don't need sidewalk. It's just the type of sidewalk. It might be more cost effective, less impact on the environment.
And it all depends. So where we have mixed rural urban areas, it's been this town standard since before I got here that you use multi-purpose trails or paved shoulders.
Okay.
In urban settings, it's been the practice that we use concrete sidewalks, and concrete sidewalks have to be a minimum of 5 feet wide to meet AODA requirements. Multi-purpose paths, I do believe, have to meet that now as well, as they were recently included under AODA standards.
Well, I feel like it's one area where we could reduce that pass along costs to the some.
Well, and generally speaking, anything new, we do require sidewalks. The challenge becomes in non-standard developments where the connectivity is not immediate, as we saw with the Gold Leaf one. It becomes a bit of a challenge because the existing connectivity isn't. And that's probably where we have not been consistent. Some subdivisions they have installed it in the area and we've been going to connect them at a later date and have done so. And then some we've required them to contribute towards those connections. So there's a little bit of consistency in our decisions on that one, and it would be good to find some kind of policy that helps guide us. I know Paul has previously been working on standard specs, which may assist greatly with that once endorsed by council.
Mr. Silva.
Through your worship, we are currently working on a sidewalk policy. It might be a good idea to include trails. I do think it's kind of a case by case basis based on, where the development is in relation to kind of an urban center and what would make the most sense. If you look at a multi-use trail as a form of transportation, you know that you're going to have e-bikes and scooters on it. And that probably makes a little bit more sense going from, not from A to B, but from A to C, like the trail over here in Reese's Corners, which, we wouldn't want to install a sidewalk there. We're glad it's a multi-use trail. So we are preparing a policy right now, but it more deals with the when and where of sidewalks. So we have different classifications of roads, for example, like arterial and collectors. How many sidewalks are we going to have? Because we find that it's been a little bit inconsistent in the past. Some of our roads have a sidewalk on each side. Some of them only have one, some of them have none. So we just want to clean that up a little bit so we know how we're going to implement that in the future.
Thank you. Okay. Councilor Vacy? Councilor Bolden? Nope. Okay. Go to item number 11. I have a motion by Councilor Vacy, seconded by Councilor Rodriguez. The council move an in-camera meeting of council pursuant to section 239, the Municipal Act 2001, amended for the following reasons. Item A, personnel matters, section 239, bracket 2, bracket B. Personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Item B, litigation matters, section 239, bracket 2, bracket E. Litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting municipality or the local board. All those in favor? Carried. For those that are joining with us virtually, with us, we will be going in camera, and once we're done, we'll be coming back out to close down for the evening. Thank you for being with us.
Mayor, excuse for 2 seconds, please.
Thank you.